The moment I saw their marker on my land, I knew one thing. I'm ending this today. I never cared much for drama. At 55, you'd think a man would earn the right to sit in the quiet of his own land, drink his morning coffee, and watch the lake shimmer without interruption. That's what I thought. At least, I bought this place precisely for that peace. The space, the water, the old trees swaying like slow dancers in the wind. But peace is always temporary when someone decides you don't deserve it. It started on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are harmless days. Nothing big ever happens on a Tuesday, at least until that one. I had stepped outside with my mug in hand, steam curling up into the cool air, when I noticed something odd near the edge of my dock. A splash of bright color that didn't belong. I squinted, thinking maybe kids had left a toy or a fisherman dropped something. No, not even close. It was a freshly placed orange boundary stake driven straight into the soil. Tall, bold, confident, and sitting at least 6 feet inside my property line. My heartbeat didn't spike. My breath didn't hitch. The anger didn't show up immediately. Instead, something else did, something colder, a kind of quiet alertness. The kind you get when you realize someone thinks you're not paying attention. I crouched down, tracing the disturbed dirt around the stake. Fresh, maybe placed last night, maybe this morning. And whoever had done it walked over my property like they owned it. That's when I heard the voice. You want to leave that there. Calm, firm, like they had authority over me. I turned my head slowly, already knowing the tone before I knew the face. A man in a gray jacket stood near the tree line, clipboard tucked under his arm. Not a neighbor, not a contractor. One of them, the type who believed paperwork outranked common sense. The type who thought wearing an official badge turned every place into their territory. I'm with the association, he said, confirming exactly what I suspected. We're adjusting the boundary to align with the latest. I cut him off with a raised hand. Not rude, just final. That line, I said, pointing at the stake, belongs on your side of property, not mine. He didn't blink. This adjustment has already been approved. By who? By what authority? How? None of it made sense. But his confidence was a giveaway. He expected me to fold, to nod, to accept, to let it happen because most people do. He underestimated me. I straightened up and took one slow step toward him. Nothing threatening, nothing loud, just calm, controlled. The way a man moves when he knows the truth is on his side. Show me, I said. He hesitated. That alone told me everything. The hesitation was a crack in the wall. Tiny, but enough to reveal the truth behind it. There's no need for her. There is, I said, my voice steady. Show me the approval. He tightened his jaw, shifting his weight like the ground suddenly felt unstable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Not a good sign for him, because if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's this. People turn their backs only when they're hiding something. I plucked the stake out of the ground, holding it in my hand like Exhibit A in a courtroom. The soil slipped off easily. No roots, no resistance. A rush job, a thoughtless job. Someone had placed this here, expecting me to overlook it. But I don't overlook anything that threatens my home. I went straight inside, grabbed the old survey file from the drawer, and dragged out the rolled map I hadn't looked at in years. The edges were frayed, but the boundaries were crystal clear. I laid it flat on the dining table, smoothing it with my palms. My finger traced the lines, the angles, the measurements, the shoreline curve. Everything was exactly as I remembered. Everything except the association's new fancy line. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because of worry, but because of clarity. Because that stake wasn't a mistake. It was a test, and I wasn't going to fail it. The next morning, when I returned to the dock at sunrise, the water looked calm, ironically calm, reflected a sky that didn't know anything about human conflicts. But the stake was gone. Someone had taken it. Interesting. If they were right, they wouldn't have needed to remove it. I scanned the shoreline and spotted something new. Footprints. Fresh ones, pressed into the damp soil, leading back toward the path behind the cedars. They matched the HOA rep's boots perfectly. I remembered the pattern: hexagonal tread with a worn heel. The kind of thing you notice when you pay attention. It was obvious now. They wanted the land. They wanted the dock. They wanted control. Maybe for access. Maybe for expansion. Maybe for leverage. People like that don't always need a reason. Sometimes the reason is simply that they think they can. But I've lived long enough to know that when someone starts by taking 6 feet, they'll end up taking 60. That was the morning I made a decision, one I didn't take lightly. I would gather every document, every photo, every survey, every witness account. I would prepare. I would stay calm. And when the time came, I would expose every lie, every manipulation, every trick they tried to play. Not by yelling, not by fighting, but by bringing the truth into the light, where everyone could see it, because truth is louder than anger, and because they chose the wrong man to test. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lift my hands. I simply laid the survey map on my kitchen table that night and stared at the red ink I drew around a property line years ago. The line wasn't shaky. The measurements weren't disputed. I had stood on that shore with a licensed surveyor 3 times, because I've lived long enough to know that people don't get bold unless they assume you're unprepared. But I've never been unprepared a single day in my life. The next morning, the lake was quiet. Early sunlight rolled across the surface like glass, and the cold mist hovered above the water. That mist always tells the truth before people do. From my deck, I could already see a figure standing by the boundary posts, clipboard in hand, stiff posture. Another representative. Another person who believed the rules bent toward whoever spoke louder. I took my time walking down. Not slow, not fast, just steady, as if the ground itself recognized a man who actually owned it. He didn't introduce himself. None of them ever do at first. "You need to remove that fence," he said, tapping the wooden post with his pen. He said it like someone reading from a script. Line 1, line 2, line 3. Never once thinking about who he was speaking to. "That's my boundary marker," I answered. He smirked without smiling. "Not according to our records." Records, the favorite shield of the unprepared. I didn't argue. I didn't present documents. I didn't explain 87 feet of shoreline rights or the revised hydrology survey from the last flood. I just pointed to the ground where the dew hadn't even evaporated yet. "Whose land are you standing on?" He didn't answer. They never do. After a few awkward seconds, he pivoted to a different tactic, the friendly suggestion method. "Look, sir, we're trying to unify the lakeside aesthetic. It would benefit everyone if you cooperated." There it was, the word that's taken more property from more quiet people than any bulldozer. Cooperated. I simply raised a rolled survey map and tapped it against my palm. Calm, measured, final. "I already did," I said. He didn't understand, and he didn't need to. He left with a fake polite nod that suggested I was stubborn. Let him think that. Stubbornness is a trait. Ownership is a fact. By noon, they escalated. 3 trucks arrived, one with measuring wheel, one with 2 younger reps, and one with someone who looked like he'd been waiting years for an excuse to use the words violation notice. They paced around the property like they were casing it, pointing at corners, whispering, glancing at my dock as if it offended them by existing. I stayed on the deck, boots on the rail, arms crossed, watching the lake instead of them. When you own water, you don't rush anything. The oldest rep eventually walked up the steps without asking. "Sir, we've reviewed the shoreline access rules. Your dock is—" "My dock," I interrupted calmly, "is older than your organization." It was true. I built it when I was 27, with my father. Every plank still holds the memory of a man who didn't believe in shortcuts. The rep blinked twice, like he wasn't expecting resistance, with a steady voice. He forced a smile. "We're giving you a formal notice. You'll need to remove it within 5 days. 5 days. They always choose a number short enough to feel urgent and long enough to make you feel trapped." I leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive. Just close enough that he couldn't miss the next line. "You should check your map before you hand me paper." The younger reps shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to calm warnings. People fear shouting, but they should fear silence more. I didn't take the notice. I didn't touch it. I let him place it on the deck railing, knowing the wind would probably send it into the lake before sunset. And if the lake wanted it, the lake could have it. They left frustrated. They always do when you don't give them the argument they came for. By evening, I sat by the fireplace with the survey map unrolled again. I traced the boundary with my finger the same way I did years ago. Not because I doubted it, because it reminded me of the work and precision that built my life. Paper doesn't lie, but people do, sometimes because they want something, sometimes because they're told to take it, and sometimes because they think you're too old, too tired, too quiet to stand your ground. I woke before sunrise the next day. Old habit. When I stepped outside, I could already hear the soft spool click of a measuring tape stretching across gravel. They were back. They hadn't even waited 24 hours. This time, I didn't wait on the deck. I walked straight to them, boots crunching on the frost, the map folded in my hand like a note you only open when necessary. One of them lifted his chin. "Sir, we're doing an updated assessment." "You're on my land," I said, not loud, not sharp, just undeniable, according to our records. I unfolded the map in one smooth motion and held it toward the rising sun, so the light cut straight through it, illuminating every line, every number, every angle. "Your records," I said, "don't overrule the state-verified survey." The oldest one stepped closer. Squinting at the map, his confidence wavered. He wasn't prepared for an owner who actually owned something besides a mortgage. I pointed, not at him, not at the trucks, but at the rock embedded in the dirt, half covered in moss. One boundary marker, placed there 22 years ago, stamped by the surveyor, legally documented. They hadn't seen it. They didn't know what they were standing on. I nudged the moss aside with my boot, revealing the metal plate underneath. The younger reps leaned in, suddenly quiet. "This," I said, "is the line." No anger, no threat, just truth, delivered the only way I know how, direct, steady, final. The oldest rep exhaled slowly, shoulders sinking as a realization settled in. "Sir, we'll need to review this." "You should," I replied, "before you come onto my property again." They packed up faster than they arrived. No more posturing, no measuring wheels, no threats wrapped in polite phrases. Just the silence of men who realized they stepped into a place they didn't understand. By noon, the lake was calm again. No trucks, no strangers, just a soft lap of water against the dock my father and I built. I stood there for a long time, map rolled under my arm, watching the sun crawl across the water. Not victorious, not angry, just steady. Because when you're right, you don't need celebration. You just need patience. The next day, a letter arrived. Not a notice, not a warning, a statement. Upon review of state survey documentation, your dock, markers, and shoreline structures are confirmed to be positioned on privately owned land. No further action required. One sentence. 80 hours of their effort undone by one piece of paper they never bothered to check. I folded the letter, set it beside the original survey, and smiled. Not the kind you show people, but the kind that lives behind the eyes of someone who's been holding the truth longer than anyone questioning it. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs its name at the bottom of the page and walks away quietly. And that's enough. Final question for viewer retention and comments. If someone walked onto your property and tried to claim it, how would you handle it? Calm truth or confrontation? Soft but powerful CTA. Tell me in the comments. Your story might be my next video.